I know it's my first solo game jam, but come on, I can totally make a visual novel with animated sprites using an art style I've never tried before, and also use my limited coding knowledge to make it a puzzle game, including inventory mechanics and clever clues hidden in character dialogue. In 2 weeks. Oh my god, I'm going to die. Hi, I'm Kiri. I'm primarily an artist, but I've been interested in game dev for a long time now. While I've contributed art to my friends' games before, I recently mustered up the courage to learn coding. Last month I put that knowledge to the test by joining a game jam and attempting to make my first video game from idea to final release in just 2 weeks. Just as I finished up an early prototype for a game idea I was using to practice coding, I stumbled upon Spooktober 2024. I had heard of this game jam before, but after a lot of practice, I now felt confident enough with Ren'Py to actually join. A game jam was the perfect kick in the pants to get my procrastinating ass to actually finish a project for once. The only problem was, it was already halfway over. In case you don't know, a game jam is a community event that challenges developers to make a game within a short deadline, usually with a theme to follow. Most are about 3 days to a week. The Spooktober jam is a visual novel jam, so it lasts a full month since visual novels tend to take longer to write and illustrate. By the time I spotted the jam though, there were only about 2 weeks left. I messaged a friend right away. There's this cool jam, I kinda wanna join, but it's already started. They were very rational and smart, saying, maybe you could join a different jam so you can use the full time frame. It might be stressful otherwise. Of course, if you're anything like me, you know that I was going to join the jam no matter what my friends said. Was that the right decision? So the Spooktober theme is Halloween, or generally spooky games. That night, as in pretty much minutes after my friend advised me against joining, I brainstormed a list of horror-adjacent game ideas. When I woke up the next morning, I looked them over and narrowed the list down. My top contenders were a Petscop-inspired psychological horror game, exploring a character's real-world trauma through more fantastical and metaphorical visuals. This was definitely too ambitious, and I knew it right away. A quirky horror comedy, where you play as a stoic butler in charge of a young noble boy who keeps getting into trouble. You know you'll always save him before he can get physically hurt, but you need to keep him from noticing that anything has actually gone wrong. Can you tell I grew up on Black Butler? And finally, a game where you play as an exorcist and must gather information about a demon to get rid of it. All the while, the demon messes with the player via jump scares and tricky language to try and prevent them from completing their task. I had the most ideas for this last option. I took some inspiration from Madoka Magica's visuals, in that I wanted the demon to visually represent the sins of the person it was hunting. This combined well with an older idea of mine, demons inspired by idioms or turns of phrase. The poster child of this concept is my original character, codename Cookie Jar, taken from Hand in the Cookie Jar. Thus, each demon would have an assigned codename in this style. I wrote out a few idioms as potential options, then picked one for the game jam. Of course, I won't spoil it for you. Writing and coding were the most important part. If I ran out of time for art or sound, at least the game would be playable. I spent pretty much the whole first week just on this step. Some parts of the gameplay were clear to me. I knew I wanted options to talk to the demon, talk to the human it was hunting, and examine the room to gather useful items. I also wanted the player to complete 3 tasks before they could confirm their selections and end the game. If any of these 3 were wrong, the demon would win and kill its victim. However, I still needed to decide what those tasks would be. Finding the demon's codename was obvious, then finding its weakness, such as how many mythological creatures are weak to things like salt, silver, or holy water. But the final task ate at me for a while. I considered having the player destroy an item belonging to the victim in order to rid them of its negative energy. That wouldn't work though, since I needed it to be an action that could be repeated or done again with a different object, in case the player changed their mind. So instead I settled on blessing the object. From there I planned out some initial code to structure the game, such as how picking up items and unlocking new dialogue would work. This is all based on simple coding like incrementing variables and using if statements to check which dialogue the player should see. For example, each time you reach the end of a piece of dialogue, the variable for that character goes up by 1. The next time you talk to them, the game checks what number your variable is at. Certain pieces of dialogue won't be accessible until you do something else in the game, so the variable doesn't increase. My solution for the items is a bit janky, to be honest, as currently you can hold one item that applies to the blessing task and one that applies to the weakness task. However, that isn't explicitly explained, and it's not clear what items you can hold at the same time. That's partially because I wanted an air of mystery, and partially because I used it to create a potential trap for players where one item can be used for either task. I kind of wanted to add some visuals to clarify this, such as an inventory screen or even just small illustrations of the items you were holding at the top of the screen, but that would have required both extra coding and extra art. With the limited time, I decided the system was good enough, but it's the thing I've received the most comments about so far. Then came writing the dialogue. I started with the human victim, as I had a strong vibe of what I wanted her personality to be, a depressed but still somewhat snarky teenage girl. As you unlock more of her dialogue, she opens up to you and shares her real feelings. This was really fun to write, as I love writing things like breakdowns and desperate moments. I'm very normal. The demon's dialogue didn't come as easily to me, but once I tuned into the maniacal villain energy, it became entertaining too. Here was where I could tease and scare the player, making them wonder if the things they'd accomplished were even correct. This dialogue is equal parts dismissing the player's abilities and dropping clues as to what to do. Some of those clues are a bit clunky, but I hope they get the job done. I wrote the room and item descriptions last, but I of course already knew most of the items I needed, as they were essential to writing the puzzles and dialogue beforehand. I had originally planned to include zoomed-in art of each area the player could explore, a vanity, a bed, a desk, and a bookshelf, to break up the visual experience, but ultimately didn't have much time for backgrounds and had to leave them out. Speaking of which, I had a lot of ambitions for the art in this game. Actually, when I said I picked out one idiom, that was a lie. I originally wanted to include 2 or even 3 demons, all with semi-animated sprites. I realized in the writing phase there was no way that was gonna happen, as they'd all need their own stories and puzzles, and the days and days I spent on art solidified that decision. Adding more demons also would have meant drawing sprites for each new victim and their families, plus original backgrounds. Yeah, you can tell I had no idea what was a reasonable scope for 2 weeks. I did keep the semi-animated style for the one demon I included though. While drawing the final sprites, I drew each body part separately, sort of like cutting a VTuber model, so that I could shuffle them around and create the illusion of movement. Then I saved the variations as PNGs, and used Renpai's built-in ATL function to turn them into looping animations. I originally wanted at least 3 base poses, the default, a laughing animation, and a dramatic reveal where the demon's head cracks open like it's made of glass. To save time, I ended up sticking with the default pose and slapping all the expressions on that one, including a quick edit of the cracking head. The victim's sprites were much simpler, and while I struggled with the demon's design, I knew what I wanted her to look like right away. Her big spiky hair just felt right, and for some reason I decided none of the humans would have visible eyes, putting them in shadow instead. I also knew I wanted to use a new textured brush that would add extraneous paint strokes along the edges of the art. That definitely didn't make everything more frustrating to draw. I like the effect though. Then, realizing the deadline was quickly approaching, I panicked and banged out a sprite for the victim's mother, as well as 3 abysmal backgrounds. I'm actually somewhat interested in learning to write music, but now was unfortunately not the time to experiment because holy shit, the jam ends in like 3 days. I gathered free horror music packs right off of itch. Here are those creators. Please check them out as their work is really great. It's totally free to use in your projects, just be sure to credit them. I also went to the website Freesound and found the sound effects I needed most. A creepy laugh, a few glass cracking and shattering sounds, a female scream, and bells ringing. Implementation didn't just happen at the end, of course. After I finished the writing and initial coding, I tossed that into Renpai and spent an entire day fixing all my syntax and logic issues, of which there were many. I always miss an indent or an equals sign somewhere. Then, as I finished each batch of art, I uploaded it into my game folder and tested it to make sure it was displaying correctly. Implementation is definitely a parallel process for me. Still, the last 2 days of the jam were spent implementing sound and making any last-minute additions or fixes. This was my first time putting sound in a Renpai game, but thankfully it was a fairly painless process. I do have a few files in the project that just refuse to play audio for some reason though, so I don't know what's up with that. At that point, the game just had to be done and working, so I didn't waste too much time trying to solve it. I also changed the font from the default one Renpai uses, though I think it turned out a bit too small. I wanted to customize the GUI more, the text boxes and menu boxes especially, but once again the art just took way too long, so I stuck to the defaults on that. Even the game icon is just the default Renpai logo, which is a shame. I literally made the game page the day submissions were set to close. Although I already had an itch account, I had never uploaded a game myself before, so I actually had to fill out my tax information first in case I wanted to monetize future projects. This game in particular is set to free with donations optional, which I've always loved as a setting on itch since it makes the game accessible, but also allows for kind people to support the creator if they want. Setting up the page wasn't as scary as I was expecting. I wrote a short description of the game's premise, a note from me as the creator, and a credits section linking to all the music and sound effects I used. I created the cover and banner in Canva. Side note, if you aren't using Canva, why? Go use it. It's literally so good and easy to use, and it has so many design features and templates, and it's free. Canva is a lifesaver. Hashtag not spawn. Anyways, once I'd tested and updated the game build a few times, I was able to upload it to itch straight from the RenPy engine, and then I just published it and submitted it to the jam. It felt surreal. There was something I had made, sitting on itch.io for anyone to play. Sure, it wasn't perfect. It was a bit messy, a bit ugly, and a bit short, but all of those words also describe me, and I'm no hypocrite. I will say, the last 2 days of the jam were not pretty. They were not aesthetic. I was basically the protagonist of a survival horror game. I could feel my stats quickly falling as I finished the submission. Once the feeling of awe had sunk in and I had messaged my friends to tell them I'd done it, I closed my laptop and stumbled downstairs to finally fill my hunger meter. Then I shambled back up the stairs to take a much-needed bath, restoring my cleanliness and sanity levels. The rest of the day was like a fever dream. The frantic pace of the last 2 weeks suddenly slowed to a crawl, and I realized just how tired I was. I don't say this to scare you away from game jams, just to illustrate how much work went into this silly little game. I don't regret it because now I have a much better understanding of what I can reasonably accomplish in that time frame. I was planning to join a week-long jam taking place a month later, but thanks to my experience with Spooktober, I realized that wouldn't be enough time to finish anything. I also realized that the other ideas on my brainstorming list, many of which I still want to make, would probably be out of scope for any jam less than a month long. I know it sounds obvious, but having more time to make a game will result in a better game. Which is why, if you've been paying attention, you might have noticed that my game Unring the Bell is labeled as a demo on itch. There are a lot of elements I wanted to expand on or polish during this jam that I just wasn't able to. In the future, I want to make a full version of Unring the Bell with original UI, more art, tighter writing, and more levels. I'm thinking of including 3 to 5 levels, including the one you play through in this demo. If that sounds interesting to you, please let me know. I'd love to hear people's feedback on the demo, as well as how long they'd like the final game to be. Any comments are greatly appreciated here or on itch. The game is also in its rating stage until the end of October, so if you play the game, please rate it. It would be super helpful. Show the other jam participants some love too. There are plenty of incredible submissions this year. I'll be taking a short break from Unring the Bell before I start on that final version of the game, both to see what people think of it and to work on other projects. I'm especially excited about the butler concept I mentioned earlier, and I also have that prototype I finished shortly before discovering the jam. I'll probably make a dedicated devlog for that game idea as well, but for now all I'll say is, Tamagotchi dating sim? Thank you so much if you've watched this far. As I said, I'd love to hear your thoughts on anything and everything in this video. What do you think of the game? Should I make more videos like this? What time is your mom free on Saturday? Drop all your comments and questions down below. For now, this is kirigaya.pnk, shutting down.